Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2236. The topic is nutrition, and the title is Doctors Are Not Nutritionists. I had a new client. We're working together for training and nutrition. We did our initial consultation on a Monday. I then wrote up their nutrition program, training program, and delivered it on Thursday. By Thursday night, they sent me an email with the following. I don't know if it changes anything, but I met with my doctor on Tuesday. They gave me a prescription for Ozempic and said I should avoid processed foods and eat a high-protein diet. This was interesting because it changed everything. And it was like, dang it, I have to rework pretty much everything I told them about nutrition. And I had to change our training program because they were now going to be eating significantly less calories, and they weren't going to be able to properly maintain muscle tissue at the training intensity and weight loads that we would have typically done with a normal amount of food. The recovery was going to be way less, so the volume has to come down. So intensity has to come down, volume has to come down. It's a lot of changes. It's essentially changed everything. Now, I have doctors as clients, and I have consulted with doctors about what they should say to their clients and even help them put together like packets of information that they deliver to their clients when weight loss is kind of part of the process and an issue that patient needs to address. So I do want to cover this topic in a respectful way, but I also want to do it in a very clear way. The title is very clear, and I want to reiterate it, is that doctors are not nutritionists. And in my opinion, they should not give nutrition advice. Now, this is... am I going to piss some people off? I'm absolutely certain I will. But you can hang around and listen to why, or you can turn me off right now, and shut your mind out. But there's a good reason why I believe this. And like I said, I work firsthand with doctors as clients and consulted with them. I have a very good understanding of the knowledge base that doctors have with nutrition and the glaring holes that are present in their knowledge. On average, U.S. medical schools only provide about 20 hours of nutrition education over the first 4 years of getting your medical degree. And the focus of that nutrition education is on general health. It's kind of another way of saying that is how to control blood markers, like blood health markers like cholesterol, sodium, and things like that. Their focus is mostly on, if we do blood work and it's a little bit off, why might that be? Why is the person eating, if their resting glucose, their fasted glucose is like high? Why might that be? If their cholesterol is high or their HDL is low, they have some understanding as to nutrition aspects related to blood work. But they're not taught how to manipulate nutrition for weight loss. They are not taught how to manipulate nutrition for peak aesthetics, meaning how to maintain muscle tissue while losing fat. They're not taught any of that. Only 27% of schools, and I looked this up in research and stuff, so only 27% of schools provide the minimum 25 hours that is recommended by the National Academy of Sciences. For many schools, nutrition is offered as an elective, so it might not even, they might be doctors that take even less than that. And there is no standardized patient exam to test a doctor's proficiency and knowledge on nutrition. There's literally no certification qualification process that says this doctor knows an appropriate amount and what they need to know to advise patients on weight loss. So based on the doctors I've worked with as clients, the doctors that I've consulted with, what I've experienced in their knowledge base, I think it's unethical for a doctor to give nutrition advice. To me, it is no different than getting nutrition advice from any other profession. Your realtor, your plumber, your electrician. those clients seem to have, in many cases, just as much knowledge base as doctors do. Now, doctors do have, in most cases, some degree of formal education. So they do have, maybe 10 hours, 15 hours, maybe up to the 20 hours. But it's not enough to qualify them to give sound nutrition advice, especially with weight loss and or aesthetics, meaning somebody wants to lose body fat, but they don't just want to strip off all their body weight. They don't want to lose half muscle and half, fat. But if a doctor prescribes Ozempic and just tells you to eat, 800 calories, that's going to cause some muscle loss. And could that improve the person's blood health in the short term and their overall mortality rate? Yes, but there can be severe long-term consequences. Often in cases where medications are used, there's no education as to why the person became overweight in the first place. And once they end this medicine, how are they going to not just go right back to being overweight? So all the same behaviors that cause them to be overweight are not being addressed or corrected by just masking it with medication. Last year, in 2024, the number one growing client category for me was people post GLP-1s gaining weight back and saying, holy freaking crap, I took the drug, I lost 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds or more, but I'm gaining 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds back. What do I do? I can't stay on this drug forever. Arguably, hopefully the doctor told them they shouldn't. But what do they do? All this weight is coming back. How are they supposed to address that? That was the number one growing client category last year. And it's indicative of the advice the person was given wasn't long-term sufficient. It wasn't long-term appropriate. Doctors do not inherently know more about nutrition than many other professions. And I do understand that that's going to ruffle feathers. People are going to be mad at me. But at the same time, is what I'm more so focused on is who needs to hear this. So yes, I will piss off some people, but I'm hoping to also save some people, because I have seen it to where a person talks to their doctor gives them advice. The advice is maybe partially true, sometimes most cases, but it isn't corrective and sufficient and in-depth and detailed. It just doesn't cover what the person actually needs. I believe if you're a doctor that you should encourage your patients to talk to a nutritionist. You could have a nutritionist on staff. I understand that costs some money, so maybe you don't want to do that. But at least have an affiliation with a nutritionist and say, hey, such and such nutritionist, when somebody is asking me these problems, like these questions, when I have these situations, what is best for me to tell them? So do a little consultation with a nutritionist. Learn from somebody who knows a little bit more details, so that way the advice you give is as optimally beneficial as possible. And then if it's advice beyond that scope, then you refer them to the nutritionist. Now, if you're a person and you've gone to your doctor for nutrition advice, please don't do that. Please consult with a nutritionist. You want to find the person whose knowledge base is as specific to what you need. So you think about engineering. There are different types of engineers. There's electrical engineer, there's mechanical engineer, there's a billion more that I'm unaware of because I just pulled that example out of my head. But there are categories. There's many doctors, even that. There's foot specialists, there's neck and head specialists, there's ENTs, there's, all these different categories. So if I want to learn more about, say, weight loss nutrition, I want to go to the professional who knows that, not just the generalized people in that field or industry. You want to get to the specific professional. And that's what I'm going to encourage people to do is talk to a nutritionist, seek out a nutritionist rather than a doctor when you need nutrition advice. I do want to include very quickly here the advice that I give to the doctors that I work with. And I'll take them through this as a client, or I'll advise them and put together packets and things if it's just a consultation. But what we want to focus on is calorie control and consistency. For most people, this is the first area that they want to start with. The only reason why we wouldn't is if it was already taken care of. So this is the first area. This is the first thing, is how do we get our calories to be an appropriate amount? We're not eating too little or too much. And then how do we get them to be consistent from day to day? That is the number one focus. The number two focus is to make sure that there's enough protein within those calories. Now, that percentage can be varied. The minimum that we try to cover is 0.6 grams per pound of lean body weight. So maybe the person weighs 250 pounds, but really, according to healthy metrics, and if you do like a DEXA scan or you do some kind of body metric testing, or even you could use a BMI, but you could use a BMI and say, okay, they may weigh 250, but really their ideal weight is like 180 to 200. Well, then you would use the 180 to 200, that range, multiply that by 0.6, and then that's the grams of protein per day that they should consume. Do we typically advise more than that? Yes, eventually you would like to get up to maybe 0.8 to 1 gram if they're lifting weights and exercising. But if they're not really exercising, they're just looking for general weight loss, 0.6 to 0.8 is probably fine for most people. But that's what we want to make sure is once we know our calories are sufficient and consistent, meaning we're eating not too much, not enough, we're eating the right amount, and we have it as pretty consistent day to day. We then want to say, okay, am I consuming of those calories at least 0.6 grams per pound of lean body weight? Then the next thing we get into is a general rule is to eat what your body likes. So what this means is don't eat what you like, eat what your body likes. Eat what digests well. Eat foods that you enjoy. You're not going to eat pizza and ice cream every meal because that's probably not the best idea. But if you like red meat, eat red meat. If you don't like red meat, don't eat red meat. If you want to focus more on carbohydrates and less fats, fine. If you want to focus on more fats and less carbohydrates, fine. So eat what your body likes, so when you eat it, you feel good. And then also eat what you like so you can be consistent. If we're trying to create consistency in our calories day per day, then it means we need to be able to eat what we eat day per day. So if you don't like eggs and oatmeal for breakfast, don't eat eggs and oatmeal for breakfast. That's totally fine. You can find other forms of protein. You can find other forms of energy. The specifics of what we eat can be wildly varied from person to person. Studies have shown that you can achieve weight loss with high carb, low carb, high fat, low fat. There's a million ways to set diets up. Carnivore versus vegan. They both work. So there's a million ways to set up the specifics of foods. But the first thing is calorie consistency and making sure that we have enough per day. And then making sure we have enough protein within those calories. And then from there, it's eat what your body likes. Eat what you feel good eating. Eat what you can be consistent with. That's really the main focus. If we can give that advice, that's best. So, for example, the advice that the doctor gave that client was to avoid processed foods and eat a high-protein diet. Those are very vague. Processed foods, you would assume they mean things like Oreos, and like quote-unquote junk food. But, the majority of foods that we consume are going to be like processed in some way. There's been some, like maybe it's pre-cooked food, maybe it's you have to reconstitute it, like canned vegetables versus fresh vegetables. Those are technically processed. So where do you define that? Like where do you put the parameters on what is bad processed versus okay processed? And then high protein, what is that? Like what does that mean to the person you're talking to? So when the doctor said high protein, that client doesn't know, is that 30% of my calories, 40%, 50%, 60%? Like how many grams? Is 100 grams of protein high because I'm only eating 80 grams now? Or do I have to eat 300 grams of protein and there's no way in hell I can do that? It's such vague advice that it's not helpful at all. It would actually be better just saying nothing and sending them to a nutritionist. Why even say avoid processed foods and eat high protein when that doesn't mean anything? That doesn't have parameters that are clear set. So that could be interpreted in a million ways. So when I meet with people and I say, how do you eat? And they're like, well, I eat healthy. That means nothing. I have heard a million definitions of healthy. So I go, oh, that's great. So what does that mean to you? Do you eat breakfast? If so, what is your breakfast? Do you eat lunch? If so, what is your lunch? I have to ask them more questions. That means the term healthy means nothing because it can be interpreted in a million ways. So when we give advice, we want to give advice that can be applied. And we want to make sure we give advice that's 100% like the most important thing the person needs to be doing, not something 17th down the list that may or may not have any significance at all. So that was all I'm going to cover in today's podcast. I just really wanted to highlight that doctors are not nutritionists. I would encourage any doctor to refer patients to a nutritionist, and I would encourage anyone looking for nutrition advice to contact a nutritionist. What matters most is caloric consistency. So we want to make sure we're not eating too little, not eating too much, and make sure we're consistent from day to day. Have at least 0.6 grams per pound of body weight in protein. And then we want to eat what our body likes. Now, real quick, if you're asking yourself, well, how do I know how many calories I should consume? What you can do is do a simple BMR calculator online. You can type in BMR calculator. And the one I like to use is calculator.net. There's a BMR calculator.net. You can type that in. If you give your age, gender, weight, it'll give you what your BMR is. Your BMR is your basal metabolic rate. That's how many calories you burn just being alive. So if you were to lay in bed with your eyes closed, that's how many calories you need to run your organs and keep your body breathing. Now, on any BMR calculator, they're going to give you an additional chart. That's going to say, okay, if you have a sedentary lifestyle, you probably need this many calories to maintain your weight. If you have an active lifestyle, this many, super active, this many. Then what you want to do is, if you're wanting to lose weight, you would eat between your BMR and whatever number they give you for your activity level. So if you have a sedentary lifestyle, eat somewhere between your BMR and that number that they assign to a sedentary lifestyle. So if you're eating below the number that they give you as a maintenance number of calories, if you're eating below that, you will slowly lose body fat. But you want to eat above your BMR, so that way you don't risk losing too much muscle tissue or causing the body to fight against the process in the long term. So that would be a way to determine what is the right amount of calories. And then anywhere within that range, because that range might be big, it might be 1,400 to 2,000. So as long as you're in that range day to day, that's your consistency marker. So there's some good information, plenty enough to get started. If you have any questions, just email me at brutalirongym@gmail.com. But I hope that this podcast gives you the awareness to talk to a nutritionist, not a doctor, if you're looking for nutrition advice. Okay? If you have any complaints, arguments, if you just want to tell me to go screw myself, you can email me at brutalirongym@gmail.com. You can also check out our services and the other things we do at our website, www.brutalirongym.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people that know about the podcast, more people will be helped by it. If you want to support the podcast, you can do a donation on our website. You can also buy your supplements from Nutricost.com. That's where I buy mine. You can use the code BrutalIron10 for a 10% discount. And then whatever you spend, we get a 10% commission. So it's a great way to get great supplements at a great discount and give back to a great cause, which is the podcast. Hopefully you see it as great. And then if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.